Mr. President, I move that Resolution 2013 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call the roll on the motion to introduce?
Councilmember Sandberg,
Yes.
Rallo,
Yes.
Gambiluri,
Yes.
Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Volin,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
That's unanimous. Will the clerk please read?
Resolution 2013, resolution proposing an ordinance to modify the Monroe County local income tax rate, allocate the additional revenues to economic development, and cast votes in favor of the ordinance. The synopsis is as follows. Resolution 2013 proposes an ordinance to the Monroe County Local Income Tax Council that would impose an economic development tax rate, also known as EDIT. The Monroe County Local Income Tax Council is the body that must approve modifications to the local income tax, and it consists of 4 member fiscal bodies: the City of Bloomington Common Council, the Monroe County Council, the Town of Ellettsville Town Council, and the Town of Stinesville Town Council. This resolution would cast some percentage of the City of Bloomington's votes on the Monroe County Local Income Tax Council in favor of the ordinance modifying the local income tax to impose an edit, depending on the votes of the individual members of the City of Bloomington Common Council.
Mr. President, I move that Resolution 2013 be adopted.
Second.
All right. This is to be presented by the mayor. Mr. Hamilton, are you present?
I am, and I appreciate it. I really have told you most of what I wanted to say. I don't think you want to hear me say all that again, but I will just simply repeat and add that this is a modest increase that we're asking for tonight. It's a bit complicated and counterintuitive, as I've said, as we've discussed, but the need will be very apparent in coming months and years. We've talked about those needs. The bottom line is that having a direct, vibrant, responsive government to deal with adequate resources is a vital effort at this time. And there are certainly, I endorse and embrace processes to go through the articulation of exactly how best to invest. I've articulated the critical importance of economic justice, of racial justice, and of climate justice, all of which are intersectional related topics that are major issues for us, and that, like we did 4 years ago to invest a modest new source of revenue in public safety, it is imperative that we have resources to invest this together in a very thoughtful, intentional way, year by year, according to plans and measuring what we do. So I appreciate all the work that has gone in this evening thus far, and just strongly encourage you at this fork in the road for Bloomington to endorse and support these resources, which will be so important to the people of Bloomington today and in the future. And I'll be happy to answer questions or comments later, but let me leave it at that so you can move on.
Okay. With that, I think we go to questions from council members on Resolution 2013. Councilmember Sandberg.
Yes, thank you. I don't know if it's too premature to speak about this, but I understand that we had a couple of representatives that were in Indianapolis today talking to a member of the Indiana General Assembly. I believe that was Ron Thompson. I don't know if it's too soon to get a report back from that meeting today from either our city attorney, Philippa Guthrie, or if Mary Catherine Carmichael is in the room, or Mayor, if you yourself have been briefed on the results of that discussion with a member of the Indiana General Assembly with respect to what their intentions may be with regard to doing anything with this lit formula.
I will tell you, I have been briefed on the meeting, and I would say there are, first of all, I want to be careful that we not try to publicly describe one member. I will give a characterization of the meeting and I think what we took away from it. We're pleased to continue to work and seek to collaborate with the General Assembly. I think what we took away was, first, it is very likely that the General Assembly will take up the lit issue and probably work some changes to it. We thought that was probably true since the voting procedure they established expires in May 2021, so they kind of set themselves that target. So we have affirmed the notion that the state General Assembly is likely to take up the lit issues of how it will be voted, how it can be done. We don't have much confidence, I have to say, that taking up of the lit will be done in a way to facilitate and enhance the authority of a city like Bloomington to move forward independently. We have not gotten indications that that's likely. We don't know what will happen. And of course, it was a meeting with one member and there are 149 others who have votes. But the main indications were they're very likely to change something. And we have serious concern that it will not be in the direction to increase authority for a municipality like us, which just reaffirms some of the points I've made about almost an insurance policy of a vote to put the tax in place. Because if we can work with the legislature and our county colleagues to create some more flexibility, that's terrific. But it is not at all clear that that will be likely to happen. So we view this as very important insurance policy to protect the city of Bloomington's ability to be sure we can fund what we need to in the future. But it was a good meeting. We'll keep talking to them, but it is hard to, we really can't predict what they will do in the future.
Thank you.
Questions from Councilmember Rallo?
Thank you. Mayor Hamilton, when you introduced this, you introduced it, as you said tonight, too, that its main emphasis is on targeting priorities of the city, notably climate change, social service funding, equity and justice for the city, which are priorities of mine. And you foresee, given the constraints that we're facing in the future, that we're going to have difficulty addressing those priorities of the city. And a lot has been made of the draft capital plan that you presented. And my question is this is just a, it's a theoretical, or it's a draft only. It's not meant to describe specifically the spending that you have in mind or that we would have in mind, but it's to give options and possibilities to consider. Is that my understanding? Is that correct?
That is absolutely right, Councilmember Rallo. I think as your mayor, I guess I try to kind of strike a balance, because I think if I had come with a proposal that was incredibly detailed, program level, down to everything that I thought I would recommend as the right thing to do, on the one hand, I wouldn't want to do that without a lot more input about what are the right exact approaches that we want to take. On the other hand, if I came with no suggestions of what the kinds of programs that we ought to invest in were, I think legitimately people would be pretty unclear about what is the purpose of this. I have tried from the beginning to articulate what I think are major challenges that confront us as a city, as a community, as a collection of 85,000 people, major challenges that confront us that will need our energy and attention. I do not pretend to know exactly what that need, how we should address it, either in 6 months or in 2 years or in 5 years, but I do believe that I have articulated key challenges that together we're going to have to evaluate how do we do it. We've started some of that with Recover Forward this year. We're going to learn what works and what doesn't work. We're going to learn what is the status of our community. That's going to be an evolving thing. But absolutely, the capital plan, I look forward to working very closely with all of you. Of course, 9 of you will have different views of what that capital plan ought to be. That's what democracy is. We work this out, as well as public input on that. So the capital plan, as it were, was, I maybe didn't write draft enough. I tried to write it a lot, and it actually added up to more than the money we're going to have. These are ideas to start reflecting the kind of investments that I think are going to be needed, helpful, appropriate, whether it's Jack Hopkins, whether it's physical infrastructure, whether it's energy efficiency, a whole bunch of other menu items to consider. And that's what I think of them as menu items.
And we're unlikely to be able to marshal the funds to apply to address those things, it seems to me.
We will not have the funds to address most of those things, in my view, looking at the fiscal condition we have and the prognosis in the next few years, unless we bring in new revenue. I am greatly thankful of 2 things. One, we as a city have established good surpluses, which are helping us get through this. And 2, we as a community have very low taxes. So we have a lot of headroom to create revenue, to focus on these huge challenges. Those are 2 good things that give us the opportunity to take the right steps.
Thank you.
Further questions from members on Resolution 2013? Going once, going twice. We are now at the point to discuss, to hear public comment on Resolution 2013. This is, for those of you interested in speaking to the tax itself, this is that moment. The clerk will recognize you and you'll have 5 minutes to speak. Madam Clerk, do we have any speakers?
Just a couple. Yes, we do. We also have a comment that was sent in to be read. Would you prefer that I read that one last, or would you?
I'd start with that.
You want to start with that one?
Please.
Okay, so the comment is as follows. Good evening. My name is Bryony Gomez Palacio, and I speak to you tonight as a self-employed small business owner and as the chair for the Bloomington Arts Commission. I'm not here to say that I want the city to raise taxes, not even by 0.25%, but the truth is that I see it as an avenue to help get all of us out of this mess. A bit of a Kickstarter, if you may, as it is evident that no city has full coffers that will last forever without asking for help from its citizens when things go haywire. And they surely are going haywire at this point. I feel the need to put my opinion towards a vote in favor tonight into context. I am self-employed. My husband and I have operated a small business from our home for the last 15 years. We practice graphic design and we organize and host conferences for graphic designers. We are in the business of bringing 1,000 people together into a theater for 10 hours at a time, several days of the year. We started our business in Brooklyn, then moved it to Austin, and finally here to Bloomington, where we plan to stay, at least until our youngest, who is a 5th grader, finishes school. Why does this matter? My business is pretty much non-existent at this point, and I have the experience of costs of living that are way higher than Bloomington. I've lived the need for higher budgets and higher taxes. One of the many reasons we chose to relocate our business and young family to Bloomington was the tax rate. Very attractive. But having funding would allow the city to reinvest in itself and us, the citizens. They are outlining a plan to get started that has room for more detailed nuances and for additional opportunities for us to voice our needs, concerns, and opinions. One of the key pieces of advice I received early on in my career was to always reinvest in myself and my business, be it through education, funding, or other means. I truly believe that this is what the City of Bloomington is aiming to do. Reaching out to all of us now, providing grants and relief funds, free parking for the summer, and other programs, but it will come to be that we will need to return the favor. Returning favors is not always easy, but in the end, if we are focused on the same goals pertaining to a successful city with thriving individuals, it is justified and necessary.
Thank you.
Mhm. Next up,
Sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. David Keppel, and you can unmute now.
Thank you. Thank you, members of the council. I plead with you, please, to approve this proposed tax. Raising taxes is never easy, but we in Bloomington know that government is part of the solution and must be part of the solution in order to help those in need and, above all, to prepare for generations to come. We are in a major climate emergency. The date is late. We don't have the luxury of postponing this to a future year. And as Mayor Hamilton said, if we postpone raising this revenue now, it's possible that the General Assembly will make it more difficult for us to do so. So look at this as a 911 call for climate and for social justice. When you call 911, you have to give some level of trust to the fire department that's coming to put out your fire, or to the hospital that's going to take care of you when you're critically ill. I think the question facing us, having heard the discussion tonight from members of the public as well as from the council, is whether the very toxic national political environment has so eroded trust that we will be unable to deal with our desperately ill physical and natural environment. I urge you not to work on worst case scenarios. Know that we in Bloomington can be better. We can work together. I think the measure that was just passed proposed by Council Member Flaherty increases citizen input in a very creative way, and I applaud it. But now we come to the very hard choice. And I urge you to take the harder path, to approve this measure, and to give us the resources we need as a city, as a community, to deal with the climate emergency and the emergency of injustice. I would just like to address one point that Councilmember Sims made. You're absolutely right that we can only do so much to reduce climate change as such. But there's another major area of climate spending, and that is climate resilience. And that will be an extremely important investment that this city can make to prepare us for the very difficult years to come. And we can do that and need to do that, but we can only do it if we have the funds to do so. So please vote in support of this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have a comment from Dave Askins with the B Square Beacon, or question, and it is, under the economic development category of local income tax, it looks like it's possible under the statute to make the distribution based on population instead of property tax footprint. The deadline for that choice is passed for this year. It's August 2nd. But in subsequent years, the Tax Council, with a majority of votes used by Bloomington City Council, could enact an ordinance to distribute based on population in the following year. It's 58% compared to about 46% of the pie for Bloomington, so it's quite a big difference. So what are the intentions of individual council members with respect to allocating by population or by property tax footprint if this passes? And your next comment is from Randy Paul. Mr. Paul, if you'd like to unmute, you can go ahead.
I'm back. like I had said previously, I hope you vote no on this. To me, this is much more than just an income tax rate. I think when people write the history of this pandemic and your legacy as a council and an administration, they're going to look at this vote. And I think the questions will be asked, did our leaders lead in a united way or in a divisive kind of way where you put city versus county, you put haves versus have-nots with no clear winner, I think, among the groups. I think this tax, in my opinion, is regressive. I respectfully disagree with the mayor that I don't think this is going to help poor people in our community. And I heard last week some people call in for public comment dismissing this tax as not being a big deal for the poor because it's roughly $25 per $10,000 worth of earnings. I think that's part of our problem. I don't think we talk enough about poverty in our community, and we don't hear enough from people who have lived it. I think it's one thing to talk about it. It's far different to have gone through that experience. Primarily, it's not talked about because it's usually painful for the people involved. And I'm going to break that silence tonight because I think my family is in a unique position to talk about it, where we went from living on a six-figure income to suddenly, because of my health, dropped almost zero in the course of about 7 months. It was before the Affordable Care Act. All my conditions were pre-existing. No insurance was paid. My pharmacy bill alone was $4,000 every single month. And it didn't take long for us just to be completely wiped out. The most painful memory during that time that I have is when I had to take my 3-year-old daughter to the doctor. She was burning up with a 102 temperature, and I sat in the waiting room for about an hour before they told me that she could not be treated because we had a past due balance of $35. So I did what most parents did during that time, and I rushed her to the hospital. The hospital took care of her, and they charged me $500. That, in reality, is what people in poverty face every single day. And so when I hear someone say $25 or $35 isn't a big deal, it's a huge deal if you don't have it. And it's a huge deal when things like your children's health care can't be paid because of it. I do think that this is even more unfair and more painful for anybody who lives in the county. If this vote tonight is structured in a way where this tax is imposed to the county without their elected officials having input on it, I think that will even further divide our community when we don't need to be divided. I think, and I hope, the county has asked the city to slow this down, which I think it has gone too fast. I agree with callers who have said we need to slow this down. There hasn't been enough public input. They've asked you to slow down and work with them on an alternative. I think that's fair. I don't disagree that we have to raise taxes at some point, but I do think some more cooperation with the county, and so that if everybody has to pay more in taxes, that they have direct input from their representatives. So again, I hope you vote no on this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up.
Next up, we have David Warren. Mr. Warren, if you'd like to go ahead.
All right. Good evening, and thanks for the opportunity to comment. I've written some words down to just avoid the perils of winging it. So in January, when the mayor first proposed a 0.5 percentage point increase in the lit and a transformative investment in fare free transit, I was on board with that. But then the world changed, and thousands of residents throughout the city and county lost their jobs or saw their incomes decline or disappear. And we all face unprecedented levels of uncertainty. Increasing a flat income tax, even by just 0.25 percentage point, may not be noticeable to many, but thousands of families, including many in our kids' school, don't have an extra 40 or 50 bucks, especially for things that aren't planned out. That's money needed for school supplies for their kids or gas for cars they have to drive to get to jobs they can't do from home like many of us. The equity concern could be mitigated if there was a guarantee that revenues would be used primarily to help those most in need of assistance in our community. But neither the unclear plans for the revenue nor a new commission intended to oversee it, or to oversee its uses necessarily guarantees that. Indeed, some of the proposed uses of the revenue proposed by the mayor include $400,000 a year in subsidies for home buyers, more revenue than is being proposed for rental assistance. Another concern I have is how this might impact future city-county collaboration. I know this isn't technically a case of taxation without representation, but it is completely understandable that it's perceived that way by a lot of county residents, whether they're liberal or conservative or pro-tax or anti-tax. There's already a frustrating amount of anti-city sentiment in the county, most of it not warranted in my opinion, but it's there, and I think if the city is able to essentially unilaterally increase the lit for the county, it'll make it harder for the city and county to work together on shared needs as the city-county metropolitan area we truly are. I don't doubt that your intentions are good, and I know we agree on way more than we disagree on. I too want all local governments to do more to reduce carbon emissions, including Monroe County. But I don't want that to come at the expense of trust in our local institutions, especially at a time when trust in many other institutions also appears to be falling. It's also worth pointing out that there are zero cost things City Council can do to move toward a more equitable and climate resilient community. No tax increase of any kind is necessary to remove exclusionary zoning from Bloomington's zoning ordinance. That we are here talking about a flat tax increase in a pandemic-induced recession while leaving systemic inequities and unsustainable aspects of city ordinances intact seems misguided. Yes, we can do multiple things at once, but removing structural inequities while also raising revenue for needed climate action doesn't mean the lit needs to be increased for the entire county. Why aren't we here discussing the relative merits of a lit increase versus the city issuing general obligation bonds? If the answer is simply because there isn't time, that suggests we didn't have the debate necessary to make an informed choice on this. Regardless of the outcome, I get how tough this is, and I promise as a county resident, I will still do all I can to support any city-county efforts to get our community moving toward a more just and sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Next up, we have Alex Goodlad. And sorry, there you are. Mr. Goodlad, if you want to unmute yourself, you can go ahead.
Awesome. Okay. Well, this is interesting. I'm at a point with this ordinance where I don't really know what to think about it. I mean, in terms of whether I support or am against it, but I do have some things to say, which is that whether this ordinance passes or fails, I think that there's the things that need to be resolved are the same, which is mass transit. There needs to be, in terms of just the fundamental thing we need to do to adapt to climate change, transportation inequity in general, is revitalize mass transit. Not just make the fares free, but make it so that houses across the city are able to access it, and so that because right now the status quo. My partner isn't like he ended up actually losing his job because the city because the buses weren't able to get him to his job, and needed to ask me for a ride. So we really need to improve mass transit in that regard, and that's very, very essential and fundamental. And I guess the mayor makes a good argument, or not a great argument, but his best argument he ever made. His arguments last week were pretty lousy. That we can kind of pass this ordinance and figure out where to put it later, which is not ideal, but it's better than just having a plan that's binding, like this plan that was proposed, which doesn't move the needle at all. It needs to all, once this tax is passed, it has to all go to it has to address some specific need. It can't just be a slush fund going to all these different places. And I understand the intent of the mayor, so he says, is to come up with possible proposals. So just have like a bunch of ideas, but it all needs to go to mass transit and address that, or it has to go to some kind of housing first initiative, because the other issue is that we live in a pandemic, and we're going to have whatever we do, whatever the tax is, my 25 out of 10K point, which is a point I will claim credit to and die on that hill, is whatever it is. There's bigger determinants than this tax, and there's going to be people without homes, whether there's a tax or not, and even more coming. So there really has to be a robust Housing First initiative, which, it looks okay on paper that at first, when looking at it, that there is some amount dedicated to Friend's Place and Shalom Center, but that's only 400K. We're going to need to do better for a Housing First initiative that's going to take care of the homeless population, and we're going to have to look at other avenues, at least for now, because it's really like it's not the ideal time to raise taxes. I'll concede to Randy Paul and others on that point. So at the end of the day, and then the other thing. So before I get to the end of the day, the other thing is that look at the mayor's track record. I hate to be kind of negative when there's more optimists in the room like David Keppel that want us to work together, and I do want to work together, which is why I was damn near inclined to support this ordinance and not be neutral. But there's still trust issues. I mean, we're going. The mayor's going to court over these trust issues. I mean, let's be real. Let's be honest about the kind of administration we have, and as constituents in the public and the community and the city council, I'm glad listens to the community. We have to hold abuses that the mayor does meaningfully accountable. So all these issues are issues we have to look at together, and I'll respect each and every person's vote, whatever their vote is on this ordinance. But ultimately, at some point, we do have to have more funds for the city. We have to explore other options. Even if this tax doesn't pass, we can get more buses through TIF funds, for example.
Mr. Goodlad, I'm sorry, the timer is seizing up, but your time is over. Yes.
All right, I yield.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Aaron Predmore. If you'd like to unmute yourself.
I'll start your timer now. The screen is not updating very quickly.
All right,
You'll have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Volan. Good evening, everyone. It's Erin Predmore. I'm the president and CEO of the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce, and I come to you this evening to appeal to you to oppose ordinance to increase our local income tax. The lack of public process makes this tax proposal impossible to support. And in an online survey this last week, 73% of the respondents opposed the current proposal in any form. An additional 18% opposed it specifically at this time. Finally, only 9% supported the proposal. So 91% of the voters that responded to this survey do not want this tax to be an additional burden on them at this time. The Chamber's concerned about the proposed tax increase are threefold. The first is the lack of public engagement. Mayor Hamilton proposed this tax increase in mid-July, but there's been no subsequent attempt at public engagement until recently, just in the last couple of weeks. I know this evening he mentioned, he made a statement tonight that there's been an ongoing conversation, but that has certainly not been the experience of the voters or the broader community. It has not been on your agenda here at the council. There have not been any public hearings. We've not had an opportunity to build understanding and consensus around issues pertaining to the tax. The proposal additionally was not mentioned during the August budget presentations when it would have been an obvious and relevant point of discussion. Feedback from the community should be incorporated at the start of the process as a way to determine whether a tax is needed and how much is needed, not after the tax increase has been implemented. Additionally, there's a lack of a compelling sustainable plan. The projects add to the city's financial burden while lacking a coherent vision for how the income tax investments would be sustained. Finally, there's a lack of collaboration. It's already been mentioned that the county opposes this tax and has asked you not to approve it. This proposal, if passed tonight, would harm much needed collaboration that is between the city and the county and also with our state legislators. County Council has issued a statement urging you to postpone this proposal, and we do agree with them. Ignoring the county officials risk damaging the important city-county relationships, which is already very frayed. We also implore the city officials to build stronger relationships with state legislators. There's current speculation about possible actions during the next legislative session, and that's being used to justify pushing through this tax increase. We would challenge that assumption by asking why the relationships aren't there, so that question can already be answered and we can already understand what our legislators may be proposing in this upcoming session. There is a precedent for a different approach, two such precedents. In 2016, the lit increase for public safety was passed with broad support for a focused purpose. And throughout the entire county, there's a wonderful picture of everyone who voted as part of that local income tax council and cheering on the positive outcome of that vote and a very positive way for our community to come together. I'd also like to point out that our voters in our community routinely vote positively about the school referendum. Every about 4 or 5 years, they increase their taxes, individually vote to approve that because they believe in our school system. In both of these instances, referendums are proposed, and along with it comes a plan. There comes a rate that people understand. There's public engagement. There are metrics and there are outcomes that are laid before the voters before the vote is taken, either at the council level or as an individual voter. That does not happen during this proposal, and we at the Chamber of Commerce oppose it for that reason. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Ross Nee. If you'd like to go ahead.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me? I hope so. I will keep this very brief. When are those bus routes going to change? I've been sitting on that joke for an hour. My name is Ross Marquis Tyler. I'm a member of the Bloomington Catholic Worker, and I care about people in poverty, and I'm a father, so I care about climate change. I just want to say that our city needs our leaders to be bold for action on climate, racial, and economic justice, especially in these super crazy times. I have been impressed and inspired by John Hamilton's draft capital plan. I was not expecting to be fully on board, but I like what I see. I am super encouraged by the passing of Ordinance 2016, and I think that advisory committee will do great work to direct these monies in a good way. I really hope that we will move forward and take action, and I hope that you will support the effort. Thank you.
Thank you. I would recommend that you check your microphone. It was a bit raspy. Let's go to the next speaker.
Okay, next up is Jill Thurman. Ms. Thurman, if you'd like to go ahead.
Good evening, Mayor Hamilton, members of the Bloomington City Council. Thank you for the opportunity to share thoughts on the proposed local income tax increase. I'm Jill Thurman, and I serve as the Office Administrator for the Greater Ellisville Area Chamber of Commerce. I join you this evening to share some thoughts. I join you this evening to share some perspective from our members. 2020 has been a tough year. Many of our members are struggling to keep their businesses afloat. Some have already shut their doors. Employees are facing a multitude of issues as well. We are all familiar with those challenges. The bottom line is our members have a lot on their plates right now. They're not in favor of the tax increase. Our chamber is comprised of just over 100 members, ranging from large area employers to small mom and pop type businesses. We asked these businesses to share their thoughts on the LIT increase and heard back from about half of our membership. The majority of those respondents were completely against the tax increase. A smaller number indicated that they were against it at this time. Either way, we did not receive a single vote of support for this initiative. After input from our members, the Chamber's Board of Directors voted to officially oppose the LIT increase and request that you please remove the issue from consideration. You should all have received our letter explaining the Chamber's position. If not, let me know and I will resend it. This tax increase is not just a City of Bloomington issue. It's a county-wide issue. It affects every Monroe County resident. Ellisville area businesses do not support the tax increase. The Chamber does not support the tax increase. We hope that you will take into consideration the difficulties that our area businesses and their employees are facing right now and take this issue off the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Next up, we have Jeff McKim. Mr. McKim, if you'd like to unmute.
Good evening, council members. Thank you for your diligent consideration of this important community issue. I particularly appreciate that many of you have actively reached out to county officials to hear our concerns and those of our residents. I've made a number of public statements in opposition to moving forward on this particular tax proposal at this time, and I won't repeat those here, except that I say that I believe that there is a better way if we work together to support legislative changes that have already been under consideration at the state level. But I want to make two comments on aspects that I haven't really talked about yet in public. First, about transit. I myself became interested in the potential increase in local income taxes several years ago as a way to increase funding for transit across the county, both rural and urban areas. I and many other transit advocates, including members of the local business community, even testified multiple times in front of the General Assembly in favor of increased opportunities to raise local revenue for transit. We see transit both as vital for social equity and vital for workforce development. While we did not get the dedicated legislation we had hoped for, it later became clear that an increase in the ceiling for an existing economic development income tax, enabled by a recent major recodification of all local income tax legislation, could be used for transit as well. I still have hopes that this tax that you're considering here could eventually be a source of funds for transit. Most advocates recognize, though, that now, while we're still in the midst of a pandemic, it's not the right time to be raising taxes for transit. That while taxes are rarely possible, waiting to be clearly on the upside of the recession is a better time to be moving forward. The administration, however, is racing to beat the clock, arguing that the General Assembly will change the income tax legislation in a way that will be vastly less favorable to cities and to Bloomington in particular. And they may be right. But on one hand, they argue this is the only chance to raise taxes. However, at the same time, the administration has explicitly removed transit from the proposal with the idea that taxes can be raised again later for transit. If the General Assembly is already going to make it more difficult for cities to raise funds, do we think that passing a vastly unpopular tax increase will make the situation better? I would guess that it is certainly more likely to make it worse. Put differently, either this is our only opportunity to raise taxes or it isn't. And if it isn't, then why the rush? I'd hope to avoid using this phrase, but I believe in the current proposal, transit has been thrown under the bus. I know that this council is very committed to transit. While I hope you postpone this tax proposal and do not vote for it tonight, I very much hope that we can work together to come up with an effective method to fund the expansion of both of our transit systems. My second comment is, while I think raising taxes in the midst of a pandemic is a bad idea in itself, I'm curious why a short-term general obligation bond as an alternative has not been a serious topic of discussion, at least not in public as far as I can tell. Yes, some shuffling between budgets would have to be done so that only capital expenses would go into the bond, and capital expenses from other funds could be moved into the bond, freeing up operating revenue. But I could easily see a 1 or 2 year GO bond to raise enough revenue to make the climate change investments that I believe many on this council support. The GO bond alternative would have the advantage that it would be city council alone making taxing decisions for city residents alone. Further, it has a built-in sunset. The city council would have to decide to issue another set of bonds for future expenses. It would be a great opportunity to make strong investment in climate change infrastructure that A, would not force residents outside the city to pay for a tax that they do not want to, and B, it would allow the economy a chance to recover before building a community consensus on additional permanent taxes. Essentially, in addition to allowing the city council to make decisions for city residents, using a GO bond would also move the funding burden from income to property taxes. I honestly don't know if that would be fairer or less regressive. It's not a no-brainer either way, but I'm just expressing surprise that this option has not been a bigger part of the discussion. Thank you very much for your time tonight, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
My apologies. Next, you have Ilana Stonebreaker, if you would like to unmute.
Thanks. Hi, it's me again, Alana Stonebreaker, Bloomington resident. I've been here so much on this issue. I believe my punch card entitles me to an ordinance or frozen yogurt of equal or lesser value at this point, so I'll be cashing that in sometime soon. I've been here in March, July, August, September on the same issue. I was worried, excited what I heard about it, but sad we don't have a plan. We still don't have a plan. I'm concerned, similar to County Councilmember McKim, that this has changed so much from being transit. Does not seem clear that even this body, this commission could endow this money to transit, though I think it's very concerning that I now hear they can give it to the police. The Eat It also, I wanted to respond to the mayor's response on Eat It from the last meeting, in which he said that he chose Eat It because
An election.
What? Oh, sorry, Alex Goddard jumping in there. So I just wanted to respond to that, in which he said that he chose it because it meant more the amount of money that he needed for this ordinance, meaning that it was more of a pie for Bloomington. Which is concerning to me because I see that poverty, racial justice, environment, those don't stop at city limits and they don't stop at city budgets. And I'm concerned that certified shares aren't considered or bonds. But I hope for the best. I believe in this community. I believe we can be better for this. And I hope that we can pass something better, stronger in the future versus this proposed ordinance in front of you today. So thank you very much. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Okay, next up, we have Claire Cumberland, if you'd like to unmute.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for having this open for comment. I'm a member of your poor and working class community who happens to support the 0.25% increase in my income taxes. I have a lot of wishes that come with the support. I wish it could be progressive. I wish I had more to say as to where the funds went. But as I heard people speaking tonight, it sounds like that might be forthcoming. But none of that trumps the facts. The facts that cities and states rely on taxes to pay for things in a way the federal government does not. The fact that the state plans on making it harder to do this in the near future. The fact that Mitch McConnell has said he is willing to let states and cities go bankrupt, of which is what really terrifies me. The fact that we're going to have a huge decrease in sales taxes due to the fallout from COVID that need to be made up for, and the fact that even if I kept 100% of my small income, I would not be able to, on my own, fund all these projects that what these taxes are supposed to be about, which is pitching in for something bigger than myself. I work very hard for what little I make, but I'm still happy to offer what little I can in service of my community. I do hope moving forward that you see this show of interest in this matter as a reason to move towards a participatory budgeting system, as people want to know the where and why of their taxes, and we deserve that. But for now, you have a hard decision to make, and I ask that you consider all of these voices and opinions, even the quiet or non-represented ones, and that you vote in favor of getting out in front of harder times to come with the small increase in income tax. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Okay, next up, there's Tyler Kane. And Tyler, if you'd like to unmute, you can go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Kane. Perhaps you can come back to Mr. Kane and go to the next. Oh, there he is.
Oh, can you guys hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that.
Go ahead, please.
I was just wondering if the proposed tax will address the emissions produced by buses in the city.
That's not a Q&A, so if you'd like to make a comment, we can maybe take it up after it's over.
Okay, that works.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next speaker, please.
Next, we have Daniel Bingham. Mr. Bingham, if you'd like to go ahead.
Oh boy. There was a lot that was said that I'd like to address, although I'm going to struggle to remember all of it. We're not going to have perfect opportunities. We have a 10-year deadline to cut carbon emissions in half. Yes, Bloomington alone doesn't solve this problem. But every single city, every single municipality, every single state, every single nation, every single person has to contribute their part to solving this problem. What is before us is really an overwhelming task. It's really hard to wrap our minds around the scales involved and the numbers involved. The money being proposed in this tax is really paltry compared to the scale of the problem at hand. But it is also a matter of every little bit helps, and we have to start as soon as possible. There are arguments being made that we should hold off for a better process or for better collaboration. I think we need to lead by example. And I think we need to get started right now, and we can collaborate with others as they step up to the plate alongside us. I'm still not thrilled. Like I respect the council's decision to pass the commission and hope that it will solve the problems we talked about earlier. I remain a little skeptical, but I also know that we're not going to get through this if we're not willing to take some risks. And one of those risks sometimes is trusting each other, even when that trust has previously been broken. So I support this tax. I would ask all of us to support this tax. I know for many people, this is a really, really hard ask. And I hear all those saying, not now, wait. My first instinct was alongside that. My first instinct was, we can't ask people to do more right now. They are suffering so much. But it's not going to get easier. There isn't going to be a better time. We might catch a breather, but it won't last long enough for us to truly recover. The shocks are going to keep coming, and they're going to keep getting worse. Even if we act with all possible speed, we're still facing things getting worse. But if we don't act at all, it's going to be exponential, and it's going to be worse than any of us can imagine right now. So we have to act. Along with everybody else, I would much prefer to have a plan to vote on than just voting on a tax. But we don't have that. And if we delay the tax until we do have that plan, then we're not going to get the money until next October. So then it's 2020, late 2021, almost 2022, and we're down to 8 years to hit our targets. We can't wait. We have to do this now. We have to get to work. We're already way behind the curve. The county, frankly, should already have a plan. They're even farther behind the curve than the city is. And I don't think it's fair for them to ask the city to wait, to raise the revenue it needs to act on the plans it has already been making, because they haven't done the work. They need to be catching up to us. They need to take their share of the revenue and figure out how to use it to cut their own carbon emissions, just as we are already doing. I know this is a hard decision, and it's a hard ask, and it's really hard to swallow for everybody right now. And I'm sitting here going back and forth in my chair as I think about it, even how I feel about it. And I don't feel great about it. But I think given what we're facing, we're gonna have a lot of these hard decisions that none of us feel great about. And we're gonna just have to do our best to muddle through. And hopefully we come out the other end with as many of us as possible in one piece. Honestly, what we are now facing, we cannot guarantee we'll all be able to get out of this the other end. We've blown that window.
That's your time, Mr. Bingham.
Good luck to us all.
Thank you. Any other commenters, Madam Clerk?
Yes, we have Natalia Galvin. Sorry, Natalia. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hello, my name is Natalia Galvin, and I am a Bloomington City resident. Much of my volunteer work has been done in the climate space, holding community meetings and organizing numerous events pre-COVID. We are in a climate emergency. The voice that is missing tonight is the one that guided most of our climate efforts, the one of our youngest Bloomington residents, the ones in our elementary schools who will likely be impacted by climate change the most. They are scared, and I am scared for them. They were at our climate marches at City Hall, and I'm here for them tonight. So I urge you to support the LIT for them. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
Okay, next up we have Ann Heaton and there you are. If you'd like to unmute, you can go ahead.
Thank you. My internet connection has been unstable all night, so I'm going to first of all say that I would like to second what Daniel Bingham said, in case I don't have a chance to go any further before getting dumped out of Zoom. This is really a classic pay me now or pay me later moment. We have not much to invest at this moment in addressing climate change, but if we don't start addressing climate change now, we're going to have less later, but our expenses are going to be greater. So speaking as a solar activist, speaking as a grandparent, speaking as a concerned citizen, I really hear and appreciate the attempts to get this project moving, even if it's moving in a direction that we're not certain of, and that will have to be amended later. I think we have to start paying forward into a fund that is specifically for mitigating climate change, because we will always have other expenses. We will have basic services to pay for. We'll have many things coming up as emergency expenses as well. But if we don't start now, we will have a great deal of difficulty in overcoming the inertia that sets in after refusing the vote on the income tax. I do hear the county's plea to collaborate more. I think that's really important for the city and the county to collaborate more. I think it is also a call to action that our voting tonight is a call to action to various other partners in the county, in the state, even in the Chamber of Commerce, to step it up and begin to enact things themselves that will forward the hope of the generations to come, that we will deal with this, we will start dealing with this, and that whatever uncertainty we may have at this moment, we will have more uncertainty in the future. So with that, I yield my time.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate the use of the parliamentary yielding of time. Who's our next speaker?
Next up is Novella Shah. Novella, if you'd like to unmute, go ahead.
Oh. Okay, hi. Sorry. So I'll make it brief. I just wanted to say that though I don't think that LIT is a perfect tax, I do think that with oversight to make sure it focuses on its original intent to pursue climate solutions, it's ultimately the right thing to do. It's always easier not to do anything, not to change anything, but we can't wait. So I think that we all have a responsibility to the future and to the present to pass the LIT right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Next up is Jacob Schwartz. Mr. Schwartz, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to keep this short too. Just to reiterate what people have been saying these last few speakers is we are at a point where we're already running out of time. Like recently, NASA found that from 2010 to 2019 was the hottest decade on record. California's wildfires are breaking records to the point that there are experts saying that we need to just stop caring about records because they're being shattered by that much. And for about this, only the second time in history, the agency that keeps track of naming hurricanes is about to run out of names for the year. So this is a crisis that needs to be addressed now, and we need to take some sort of steps towards fixing it. Otherwise, if not now, when? If we wait for a perfect solution, that's never going to come. But we need to take some sort of action to address this issue. Otherwise, it's going to be even more too late than it already is. Thank you, and I guess I yield my time.
Thank you. Any final commenters, Madam Clerk?
I don't think so.
Last call for public comment on Resolution 2013. Seeing none, we come back to the council for debate or further questions. Do any members have questions? Councilmember Rallo.
Yes, to address one of the two concerns by County Councilor Jeff McKim, I understand that this revenues from the lit could be used for public transportation. Is that correct?
May I speak to that, or?
Yeah, whoever can speak to it, please do.
Sure. Yes, I would absolutely. We look forward to working together on either additional funding or, of course, the county's source and share of this tax revenue, if it came in, could absolutely be dedicated by the county to expansion of public transit. People should know that Bloomington Transit got about an $8 million cash infusion from the federal government in response to the COVID crisis and such, which has been a huge help. And it's one of the reasons that BT does not have immediate cash needs that would counsel us to do that at the city. But absolutely, the county could use the money that if this tax were to go into place, that they could use that for transit, absolutely. And I'd be happy to comment on geo bonds too, if somebody wanted to hear about that, but I'll let you carry
Please
that.
do.
Well, it is true, the city could use geo bonds. I guess a couple main points. That is a tax increase, and it's a tax increase that affects property tax, which of course is generally passed through to the tenants. 2/3 of our residents are tenants, and directly goes to tenants. So it is a way to raise taxes. I think the second point, and maybe more importantly, is the city is really averse to using general obligation bonds for even short-term bonds for operational expenses. Much of what we're talking about in the needs here are not long-term capital. Some is. The county has a tradition of using geo bonds for what we would consider short-term or even operational expenses. The city just does not like to do that. We don't think it's responsible. We have looked at that, but that's not an approach that we would recommend. And I'm sure we could give you more detail on that, but it's certainly something that the county has used those for more short-term expenses. But in our view, we use bonds, for example, with the bicentennial bond for long-term deep capital investment, not for many of the kinds of funding that we would need here for Jack Hopkins or for some of the energy efficiency grants or many of the other things we're talking about.
Mr. Rallo, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Further questions before we go to debate? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I wanted to follow up on the question about the allocation amount of the lit if it passes, because there are two ways to allocate the funds. I understand the default is the prior year levy plus a welfare allocation. And then the other way to allocate the funds is by population. Could Mayor Hamilton or maybe Mr. Underwood, if he's on the call, describe those options for us and what we're going to do?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think the first point I would make is I wouldn't assume those will remain. I think it's quite clear the state legislature is going to be changing many of the components of lit, and I would not be surprised if they looked at those. But as the person commented, I guess it was Dave Askins, there are two allocation methods. The standard one is the one that would go into effect next year if this tax is passed this year in the next few weeks. It would be the standard allocation. The tax committee, the local tax council can adjust that. We haven't, frankly, we just haven't really looked at that very much. It's certainly something we could talk about, but I wouldn't be surprised if the state legislature changed that as well. So I think it's kind of a point to consider down the road.
Well, could you explain further what the standard is?
Well, the standard is, I guess the simplest way is it's the same split as the PS lit. It's done exactly the same for the economic development local income tax as it is for the public safety local income tax. Percentages to the four bodies of Steinsville, Ellisville, county government, city government, and it's based primarily on assessed value. I think there's a formula, but it's the same formula as used for the public safety lit.
And then the other option is to divide the funds by population. And,
yeah.
And if we were interested in that, we would be able to adjust that in the future, given the current rules.
Given the current legislation, the local income tax council, I believe, can choose to opt for the opt-in side of that, which is population-based. If you take affirmative action to do that, you can do that as local income tax council. You have to do it as by the date in August, I believe, for the following year. Of course, you can't do it until you have a lid in place. So we couldn't do it this year, and we'll just use the default. And if the legislation remains, then we'll have something to talk about next year about that, I guess. But we don't have any particular plans on that.
Thank you.
Further questions from members before we go to debate? Councilmember Rallo.
I wondered if the mayor could expand on the legislature's potential impact on this.
Well, yes, and I appreciated Council Member McKim referencing the legislature. I do have to say I can't help the image of Charles Schultz's Charlie Brown and Lucy in the Football kind of comes to mind a little bit in talking about, and Mr. McKim himself, of course, has had the experience of many times trying to get the transit tax approved in the legislature, and they did not approve it. And we have many times, as an organization of cities and towns, sought to have the authority to have city-only lit local income tax authorized by the state government, and they have consistently refused to do so. So while I certainly agree that it is appropriate for us to continue to work with this legislature, I do think we have to remember what state we live in and the supermajority in the legislature that has not demonstrated great affinity toward municipalities. And I think, look, as I've said before, I also think we are following the law that the legislature has created to put this into place. And it's also really important to remember, in my view, respectfully, that 58% of the county residents are city residents. Every city resident is a county resident, pays county taxes, is a full-born county resident. And if 58% of the county residents say we want a tax to be imposed on our county, that is a majority of the county. And we are county residents and we fully support the county government. We work very closely with county government. And we look forward to going to the legislature. I just would emphasize again that if we put the tax in place, we're in a very different position to discuss with the legislature, hey, why don't you release the tax from the non-city members of Monroe County by letting the city do its own tax? And we'd be absolutely supportive of that at that time. Thank you.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith, you had a follow-up question.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we followed up that with public comment that was actually questions. There was one question from Tyler Kane about will the tax address emissions from buses in the city? So of course, we don't know for sure what the tax revenue will be used for, but is that a possible use of the tax revenue?
Well, the tax revenue could be used for all kinds of different transit uses. As I mentioned, at present, transit is positioned to manage what is an extremely complex and challenging time for public transit. But two things of note, as I mentioned, the federal money has come in very importantly. Support your federal legislators who supported that. Number two, we are very active in Bloomington Transit. We've just gotten a major competitive grant to purchase more electric buses. We are moving substantially to explore that option of transit with electric buses, and we'll continue to look at ways we can become more energy efficient, a cleaner system, and we'll absolutely look at that. They just did a route study to try to increase the efficiency of services, which also has an effect of reducing emissions. But yes, the tax can be used for transit. Thanks.
Further questions? Seeing none, we go to debate on Resolution 2013. Who would like to speak first? Councilman Borrello. Well, I'm gonna ask members to limit themselves to 5 minutes. I'm gonna put you on a timer. There is 2 rounds of debate without special request. Go ahead.
I think I'll use much less. I think that this is a very important vote. It's a very important thing to pass. I don't think we have the luxury of time. And I think that's why we need to act with this level of urgency. I think it's exceedingly risky to delay, actually. I hope I'm proven wrong if this fails, but that's my read. And I won't expound, but we all know the risk. Although this is a flat tax, has been mentioned, that's what hand we've been dealt. And we can mitigate that by applying it to social service spending, which we intend to do. Can it be used for other things than what is in the draft capital plan? Yes, of course. The mayor has made it clear that the capital plan is yet to be determined. And what was offered was a draft. It was offered as a not definitive, but illustrative of what it could be used for. In any case, it will be used for our climate emergency, which we committed to addressing, regardless of what our economic situation is going to portend. We need to keep to our commitment. And I was there when the demonstrators arrived, and I credit Mayor Hamilton with taking this seriously, and I think that we all do. This is the means by which we continue that trajectory, because without it, it's far from certain that we'll have the resources necessary to do it. And I think we need to realize that we're going to have falling funds as projected. So we simply won't have the means by which we could apply what we need to, what the demand will entail for social services, for climate change, and so forth, or for transit if we decide to apply it for that. So I think that we need to do this. I think we need to move ahead. I think it's a bold thing to do, but it's necessary. I think it's looking forward, it's looking ahead. And I urge my colleagues to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes, thanks. First, I just very much appreciate all the members of the public who have reached out to us and commented tonight or sent in emails. And a lot of folks have been engaged with this issue, not just in the last month or two, but throughout the year. And I appreciate that. You know, regarding some of the process concerns, again, it's the hand we're dealt to some extent. And I think there are valid concerns about how that may change in the future and not ones that we should easily dismiss. You know, the public safety lit was passed with actually what one might consider a less equitable process a number of years ago, without anyone really raising any problems with it at that time. So it's really not a problem of process, or at least it seems everybody was okay with the process when there was a consensus agreement about the direction of things. But there's not always going to be agreement. You know, Mr. Bingham made a good point that, and this kind of gets to city-county issues, that we've done a lot of work and a lot of planning over the last 5 years. We're in the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. We passed the Yes resolution last year. We are in the We Are Still In declaration. We've tracked our greenhouse gas emissions inventory and backcast that to 2011. We have developed detailed, specific plans to address this crisis that is unfolding in the most equitable way possible, in the way that addresses vulnerable populations, in the way that helps people here now, today, with their energy burden, with their food burden, with their transportation burden. And we are doing our best to implement those things because it's needed. And we've committed to doing so. And our community plans and adopted goals say we should. And the county, frankly, while I think they're sympathetic to a lot of these issues, they haven't done the planning. They don't have commitments on greenhouse gas emissions reductions. They don't have targets. They don't have a climate plan. And that's something they do need to come along with us on. And the fact that we can't agree fully on that at this time is really a reflection of we're differently situated with response to the climate crisis, even though we all care about it. I know that is true from the conversations I've had with county colleagues in recent days. I've spoken with all 7 county councilors in the last few days. And those conversations I've very much appreciated, and they've gone quite well, honestly. I feel very good about my relationship with county councilors. There are a lot of points of common agreement and an understanding about where we need to head as a community, and a high level of understanding about why we may differ on this particular issue at this particular time. So I feel good about that, actually. And I think the narrative that this is a toxic relationship is absolutely false, unequivocally. Let's see. Regarding how to weigh a decision like this, I appreciate that Councilmember Smith, for instance, has reached out to a lot of people and even did a survey on Nextdoor, which I think admire and applaud. And I know the chamber surveyed its members, as did the Ellettsville Chamber, and got those details to us. The tricky thing here is that any survey is imperfect. There's all sorts of response biases, and they're not representative. And at the end of the day, we don't govern by referendum anyway. We live in a representative democracy where one of the major benefits is that elected officials can make difficult decisions based on what they think is in the greater good of the community, even at times when a majority may not support that. And that might be the case right now. Governing by referendum is not always desirable. Sometimes it takes staying committed to the plans we've made, to the goals we've outlined, and thinking about the greater good. The chamber, for instance, on their website, the beginning of their mission statement says, "The chamber strives to promote the continuous improvement of the common good." And while I sometimes disagree with things the chamber advocates for, I absolutely agree with that statement. And I think anyone looking honestly and earnestly at the climate crisis would have to say that addressing that crisis that is unfolding and addressing it meaningfully for the most vulnerable, for the next generations, and for us all
is unequivocally in the interest of the common good. That's what we're trying to do here. And if this plan isn't good enough for chamber members, please do reach out to me and tell me your alternatives. I want to talk about them. I know transit's a high priority, and I think we share that goal. But we need to talk details. It's not enough to say this isn't quite right. There are valid criticisms of this, and nothing is perfect. I understand that, but I'm doing my level best to hear those concerns and address them. And at the end of the night, my vote comes down to a relatively simple question, which is, do I think this is the right thing to do in the interest of the greater good of the city of Bloomington? And that answer is yes. So I would encourage my colleagues to vote yes as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, who would like to speak to this issue? Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, President Volan. So part of my thinking on this is, first we kind of started with 0.5. We were in transportation. And of course the pandemic hit, and now we're at 0.25. And now is this a climate response ordinance? Is that what this is now? So I feel like it sounds like that now. And maybe that's part of my problem, is that it's been an amorphous ordinance to begin with. It's kind of had too many things in it. It has had no focus. And that initially bothered me right away. There was too many things in too many different little things. There was climate, great. I'm happy to support taking care of the planet and environmental causes. There's recreational things in it, recreational initiatives. There's social services, of course, I'm for that. Jack Hopkins, but it's this amorphous plan that it's like, let's raise some money and we'll figure out what to spend it on. And that initially gave me great pause. And so part of that, I did what we all do, because I know you're all smart and interested in what other people think. So I went out there and asked a lot of people. I called friends. I called people who I respect, who are in politics and out of politics. And the general consensus is that people don't want this tax. And I realize, as Council Member Flaherty said, it is a representative democracy. I certainly get that, and I understand. But when so many things are arrayed that say we don't want this, it just made me think a lot, and so it doesn't lead me to feel like I can support it. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Smith. Further comments from members on Resolution 2013? I know you have things to say, people. I see Councilmember Piedmont Smith, followed by Councilmember Sandberg.
Yes, thank you. This has been one of the most difficult decisions I've had to ever make as an elected representative, because I can see good arguments on both sides. I want to point out that there's more than one way to address climate change. And the 0.25% tax is not going to make enough money to make all the changes we need to make. That said, I hear Daniel Bingham, I hear you. We need to do everything we can do, yes. But I feel like sometimes you can get more done with collaboration and with listening and with getting people on your side than with imposing something upon people. And so, unfortunately, I have to say I cannot vote for this tax. I've also, like Councilmember Smith, and I'm sure all of you, I've talked to a lot of people, people whose judgment I value greatly and who recognize climate change is a crisis. And I have also not heard a lot of support for this tax. I feel like we need to work with people on climate change. We need to bring people into realizing how urgent the situation is so that they can make changes in their own lives and with their own businesses and with their own employees and their own investments. And I feel like raising a tax when so many people are hurting is not going to win us friends. You know, it's not going to increase my ability to talk to somebody and let them know that, you know, we need to change the way we live because of climate change. I mean, like I said, local government can only do so much for climate. We have to do it. Yes, we have to do everything we can. I agree. But we also have to get the private sector on board. And what I've heard from business leaders and people who are the movers and shakers in the private sector is that they don't think this tax is a good idea. And I also can't look somebody in the face who is, you know, used to work 2 jobs and could barely support their kids and now is down to working 1 job, and, you know, asking them to pay $75 or $50 a year, that matters to them. So, you know, we can say all we want, hey, it'll be okay because we're going to do this and this investment and you'll benefit from it. That doesn't matter to somebody who needs those $50 now. As far as what the General Assembly might do, you know, they're going to do what they're going to do. I don't want to make decisions for fear of what the General Assembly might do next. You know, because if they don't screw us on this, they'll find some other way to screw us over because they are regressive and they are not acting in the best interest of the common person. You know, I can't make my decisions based on fear of what they're gonna change. So I have an immense respect for people who have tried to convince me that this is a good tax and that we should vote yes. But I can't do it. So I'm going to vote no this evening.
Thank you. Councilmember Sandberg.
Thank you very much. And I'm not going to be coy. I'm going to say up front that my vote is a no. And I am not going to have the time in my 5 minutes, or if we get a second round, my second 5 minutes, to point by point go through all of the struggle that I personally have had in coming to this decision. But I will assure the public that in order to recover forward, we are going to need resources. So make it very clear, I am not going along with the individuals, the many folks who have contacted us who are, you know, frankly, you could consider them anti-tax. There would be nothing that we could propose tonight or in the future that they would feel that they wanted to pay taxes to support. So we are in hard times. We are going to be facing harder times. And in order for us all to keep this community the way we want to see it, healthy, prosperous, equitable, We are going to have to do everything in our power over the next several budget cycles in order to be on top of this. With respect to basic city services, which is what we're all going to be called upon to provide, as well as all the wonderful amenities that have been discussed in this proposal. And I agree with many of my colleagues, it's all over the map. There is not a clear focus to it, and that's problem number one. Problem number two, which Councilmember Piedmont Smith alluded to, is cooperation, coalition building, alliance building. And it is my personal opinion that that was not done adequately in order for us to get to a place that we would have a proposal that would have a broad enough consensus. This is not just the city of Bloomington acting alone. We're not in a vacuum here. We must consider our county colleagues, and there are very many reasons for why they are opposed to this. Many people have tried to convince me that this is similar to the public safety lit, and it's not. That was a clear focus. All were in agreement that the public safety aspects of funding dispatch and police and fire was so incredibly important that many individuals were willing to risk their political capital, possibly go against the grain of their own constituents and say, this is important, this requires us to raise taxes. So that was then, that was 2016 when everybody did pull together. Now we're in a different situation that requires us to think differently about it. Make no mistake that my voting no tonight is not my giving up and taking the easy way out, and because I am dedicated from this point forward to working with the mayor, working with his staff, working with all of my colleagues on this council, working with the county council, and working with all the stakeholders that we are going to need in order to make sure we have the resources to manage this city and this county in a responsible, equitable, and emergency. We are in an emergency. Many of you have alluded to all the various emergencies that you are identifying, not the least of which are people losing their jobs, people falling into poverty, people losing housing. Social services, as you all know, is one of my highest priorities as a member of this council. I have many things that I support and have supported during my time as a decision maker on this council. But in going forward, it's going to take all of us to circle the wagons, come back, come up with a better plan, come up with a plan that has wider and broader consensus, and I will be working overtime to help make that so. So in my voting no tonight, I don't want anyone to mistake that I don't care about people without voices, people without resources. I do. We can make this work. We can make this better. Thank you.
Thank you. Further debate from members who have not yet spoken first round. Councilmember Scambaluri.
Thank you. Anyone who has known me longer than about a half an hour has probably heard me utter the phrase, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And this is a great example of that. I am grateful for everything I have learned in all my conversations with constituents, and I'm grateful for what I've learned from my colleagues, both tonight and in previous weeks. I respect every one of you in the degree to which you've wrestled with this, and whether or not we agree, I respect your decisions. First things first, I wholeheartedly support the goals mentioned by the mayor, and I appreciate his keeping front and center the core values of economic justice and racial justice and climate justice. Those should indeed be the lenses through which we look at every piece of legislation that comes to us, not just this one. I also agree that these are extraordinary times. The panic and the pandemic and the economic downturn and climate change are presenting extraordinary challenges. We have to respond now, and we have to think ahead and think 2 and 3 years down the road. That's why earlier this year, when the mayor introduced an earlier phase of the Recover Forward plan, I was pleased to support it. And I voted with a lot of my colleagues to take our reverted funds, the savings we'd realized in the city budget, thank you to our staff, and to redeploy it, to find ways in which to use it to help us recover forward, even though there were not crystal clear plans necessarily. Okay. So I was pleased to do that. I also think that the LIT itself is a really important tool in our toolkit. And bravo to the council, and by that I mean the tax council, for recognizing that it has such an important place in accomplishing our goals. I am not anti-tax, but I so applaud what I wasn't on council at the time, but I applaud what you did with the public safety lit. I think it was a great example. It had a clear focused set of goals. It was built on some broad consensus among city and county colleagues, and it had a robust public engagement process. Looking at this legislation, the proposal before us isn't talking about reversions and just redeploying them, about unspent funds. It's asking us to impose a new tax with no sunset date on our residents. And that's a qualitatively different decision in my mind. And while it does point to the three broad themes we talked about, it isn't talking about a clear, coherent set of priorities. It's talked about an eclectic set of initiatives ranging from down payment assistance on housing to undefined support for life sciences jobs to planting and pruning urban trees. And it isn't based, and this is maybe what I'm most concerned about, it isn't based on substantial public engagement or on truly collaborative discussions with our colleagues in county government, with whom we already have a strained relationship in many ways. So when I looked at this legislation, I asked myself, is there a clear, coherent plan in place, or are we close to one for spending these funds? And am I confident that the elements of this plan will actually move the needle on economic justice and racial justice and climate justice? I also looked at timing. Is this the right time to pass a flat tax? Economic and racial and climate justice are, of course, critical issues today, and they will continue to demand our attention regardless of what happens tonight. On the other hand, we're mired in a pandemic and in a recession, and there's no clear end in sight. A lot of families have experienced job loss, have depleted their savings to cover just basic needs like housing and healthcare. Mr. Paul and Mr. Warren, I found your comments particularly moving in bringing to life what it means to be poor and what it means to make decisions about small amounts of money. I am also very concerned about process. We have not engaged in significant collaborative conversations with our county colleagues. Since the mayor's announcement of this proposed tax on New Year's Day, and since the revised proposed announcement in July, we have had, as he said, at best, informal opportunities for residents, and Ms. Stonebreaker commented on this as well, to weigh in on this. That's not good enough. Not when we're talking about imposing a new tax on our residents. The best decisions about solutions and trade-offs will be made with engagement and collaboration. The mayor has also suggested this is our last chance for the foreseeable future, that the legislature is going to be taking away our ability to impose a tax when they convene in January. To make it short and suffice it to say, I've reached out to our representatives in the General Assembly and asked about this very issue. And I'm not as convinced as he is that that's the case. So in sum, I believe deeply in the goals that were in the mayor's thoughts originally: economic justice, racial justice, climate justice. I am not convinced that the various elements discussed in the mayor's plans for this lit make it the way to get there. I am convinced that even if it provides some benefits down the road, this tax would place an additional substantial burden on families that are struggling the most in this pandemic economy. I'm not convinced that this will be our last ever opportunity, or as Mr. McKim said, our last ever mechanism for generating revenue locally. And I am convinced, one more point, and I am convinced that a better response is possible if we make a serious effort to engage both the public and our county colleagues. With that, I'll be voting no on this tax.
Thank you. Further debate on Resolution 2013. First round only, please. Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to start by saying thank you to everyone who has reached out and engaged in this process, not only in the last month or so, but when we first started this at the beginning of the year. I think we've all received a lot of emails. I will say I have read them, but I have yet to respond to all of them. So just want to put that out there. A lot of people have touched on a lot so far. So I think what I want to say is, you know, I think like most of us here, yes, I wish we could have a progressive tax. I wish we could pass a progressive tax, but our state just doesn't let that happen. And I know I asked questions about whether or not we could rebate money back to folks, you know, in certain income brackets, and that's not possible. And I think that's why it's so important to look at creative ways that we can get around the hurdles that our state puts in front of us. And it's difficult here in Indiana, right? I mean, we wanted to ban plastic bags and then we were banned from banning bags. We can't have true inclusive affordable housing. We can't do these progressive taxes. So I think, especially in times like this, we have to do our best to move forward and to, like I said, to get pretty creative to support our community members, especially when there is just such a great need and people are having such a hard time. So I think with this tax and with an outline of how this would be spent, and now with the ordinance to create a commission to really make sure this is going toward the purposes that we're here for, I think this was our way to, you know, work around the system in front of us and make something as progressive, as similar to progressive tax as we could here in the state, so that, you know, we would be taxing all income, but we would use those funds to help people in the most need, and we would use those funds to take steps to adapt and mitigate to our changing climate. I know there's been a lot of debate about the best time for this, and honestly, I would say I struggled with that a lot. And I think with taxes, you can kind of say there's not necessarily a good time to ask people for more money. I think potentially if things are going well, you might say, hey, everyone's doing great. Why do you need more money? And so it's just, you know, it's hard, I think, to figure out when that is right. I think a lot of public comments tonight had a theme of, especially in terms of climate, like we can't wait any longer. I think we tend to say a lot of things about why we want to wait, right? We need more data. We've got to do this first. This is a bad time. And I think at some point we got to be honest with ourselves and think about future generations and say, hey, we're going to make these hard decisions. We're going to make some potentially unpopular decisions and put some things in place to make this world, you know, stick out a little longer. That barely made sense. I'm sorry. So I'm just reading my notes. I think there's been a lot of talk about how people who don't make very much money right now can't afford this. And I agree that any extra expense can be difficult for sure. I think Mr. Paul's comment on trying to afford medical bills was incredibly real and touching. But what I didn't really hear that much about is the people who aren't making any money right now. So we've got a lot more unemployed folks due to the pandemic. And I think we've really got to think about them as well. I keep looking at the timer, I can't see it. I hope, I mean, it looks like this isn't going to pass tonight. So I hope that what we can do moving forward is continue this discussion with a sense of urgency, both to alleviate some of the suffering people are experiencing, and then to think seriously and consider steps forward to address our climate emergency and to look at economic justice and racial justice. So I would say I had planned on voting yes on this. And I just hope that we can not look at this as an end to the discussion, but really get to work and figure out what we can do to help folks right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. I want to thank the public for their comments, impassioned comments of my colleagues. But what I really want to say is, You know, when I was caucused in on this council in August 2017, and I walked into the council, met my colleagues, and was smack dab in the middle of my very first budget hearing. And I thought at that time, this is the absolute toughest part of what I'm going to ever have to do until I got got through that learning curve. Of course, then we go through UDO, we go through a bunch of other things. That took some time, but not difficult, or as difficult as one would perceive. This decision tonight has been the most difficult decision or the thought process since I've been on this council. I heard a lot of comments that I could relate with. I was one of those folks before I ever came to Bloomington 45 years ago that grew up with very, very little means. Meager, you might even say. I value the dollar. I am one of those people who happen to be very liberal, yet financially conservative. I've been going back and forth. Yes, we could use some extra revenue to do certain things. Whoa, maybe we ought not. Maybe we ought to just tighten our belts and, withstand all of this. Tonight, I was prepared, as difficult as it would be, I was prepared to support this several hours ago. Even though I talk with many, many people like my colleagues, what many of us would consider heavy hitters in this town, very influential people, very knowledgeable people. It was difficult. Corporations, organizations, people that I've worked with hard in order to better this community, like many of my colleagues. This is difficult. The term the greater good. As we listen this evening, I get to thinking, is this really the greater good, as I had thought a couple hours earlier? What about the process? I've heard from community folks, many of you have, but did we get extensive community input? And when I say extensive, I mean meaningful input. Did we really get that? I was a little shocked, and I hope no one views this as non-supportive of some of our climate change issues. But part of the ordinance we talked about and how it kind of changed from the overall good to a more specific part of the agenda, that in my mind, it does not reciprocate well through a lot of the other pegs with social justice. Now, I know there is some interconnectivity, as I've talked with several folks, there is. But there's still, in my mind, not an equitable distribution across the board that is going to uplift everyone. And so there are strong voices that, well, if we do this, it'll affect that and it's going to help. Well, turns out it's maybe not as much as maybe we all thought at the beginning. I say all that to say that this is very difficult, again, for me. As we move through the night, it was, as one of my colleagues said, either way you voted, I don't feel good about this tonight. This is not a good feeling. I know people. I have entry-level friends and colleagues that are, and let's just face it, they're looking at laying off and getting furloughed as we move forward. You have to consider those things. They're looking at that. If we pass this tax, can we buoy that? What can we do with that? There's only so much the city can do. I am proud of Bloomington, Indiana for at least my time in elected office and some of the work we've done, because we've done really, really good things. With regard to climate change, that's why I mentioned earlier a more broader perspective. more collaboration. There's only so much we can do. I think Bloomington, the city government, and some of our local folks have done a lot. It has to be broadened, but it seemed like it seemed like everything started to move toward that way exclusively. And I know that's not the case, but that was the way it appeared. And I know I'm out of my time, so before the president says anything, I just want to say this is difficult. Was prepared to say yes earlier today. As it looks now, I am leaning toward the no side based on a lot of the comments that I hadn't heard from the public earlier. So thank you. Thank you for indulging me, Mr. President.
Thank you. I guess it's my turn. There have been many good and relevant comments about this proposal on both sides. In particular, Mr. Warren's and Mr. McKim's comments were excellent. The only point of theirs I take exception with is the point about the issuance of general obligation bonds, which, as the mayor pointed out, can't be used for operational expenses, which are called for right now. Everyone has seen the blows rained upon this city by the State House. I am more than a little tired of the constant criticism of a city that is struggling to govern itself, not others. The entitlement that non-city residents demonstrate in giving their opinion about how the city should behave astonishes me. To those who say that the tax is regressive and unrepresentative of non-city residents, first I say that is an argument to cut taxes in the name of poverty relief, which sounds like a talking point that Republicans have been making for the past 40 years. That argument has validity only as much as the use of those tax dollars don't help those most in need. Second, I say emphatically that your quarrels, ladies and gentlemen, are not with this city council, but with the State House. The LIT used to be the LOIT, the local option income tax, and there used to be a county option income tax. The state has literally removed the option and all other options from us. The General Assembly and previous governor's administrations the past decade have threatened the very sovereignty of the city of Bloomington. Do not underestimate the anti-city sentiments of those who are also anti-tax. The mayor was right. If he doesn't present a proposal, he's criticized for no detail. If he presents a specific plan, he's criticized for the details. And I would urge people not to blame the mayor for the compressed process that we indulged in tonight and this past couple of weeks. The choice to schedule this was driven by the pandemic, the deadline for beginning the tax next year, and the choices I made about how and when to hear this discussion. Nevertheless, the panoply of initiatives the mayor proposed only served to glaze people's eyes over and open his proposals up to criticism that it was unfocused and not directly related to either climate or racial justice. He could have mitigated this by simplifying the ask. Had the mayor sold the tax solely as a bulwark against the greater recession created by the pandemic, because we know that fiscal year 22 and later budgets are going to be grimmer than the Great Recession a decade ago, it might have found favor tonight. But I think more likely that had the mayor proposed a 25-cent tax that would go entirely to public transit, I would have been surprised if it didn't pass with votes from across the Lit Council. Public transit now is like dispatch was 4 years ago, a service that has been consistently underfunded but serves everyone and is something most everyone can agree on, particularly our county colleagues. A year ago, not only was I enthusiastic about a 50-cent lit, half of which would go to transit, I had been actively asking the question, why wouldn't we devote the entirety of a 50-cent tax to transit? The only hesitation I have about proposing that right now is that it might be a while, thanks to COVID, before the new transit service that these dollars would fund would benefit anyone. These are reasons why I support this tax now. But if it is true that we are not actually voting on spending tonight, merely the raising of revenue, it may not be too late to call for such a tax, but instead to be used for transit, maybe even to convert this proposal to a transit lit. I welcome everyone to consider that idea as we consider this problem in the days, weeks, months, and years to come. With that, that ends the first round of debate. Does anyone have a follow-up comment? Councilmember Rallo.
Just 2 brief comments, I think. One is I'll be looking to my colleagues who are in opposition of this lit this evening to proceed on working on revenues that we'll need in the coming years because we will need them. And regarding climate change, the best time to address climate change, of course, was yesterday. Second time best time is today. I don't think that we can afford to wait. I think that we need to proceed now. I don't think we can wait for better days, years from now. I think that it's incumbent on us to act. And maybe I'll make one last comment, and that is to say, if we want to address climate change, social and racial justice, that's up to us. It's not just going to be outlined in the spreadsheet given us by the mayor. We have input on the revenues for this, and so we can address it. It's not just delineated by that spreadsheet, which I've said before. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other final comments? Councilmember Sandberg.
Thank you. And I certainly appreciate all of my colleagues, and however we decide to move forward, the utmost respect for all of the passions that we all bring to this table in making decisions. I do want to say one last gratitude to all the individuals who reached out to me and who I reached out to and provided such great counsel and advice. Just a little bit on the funny side in terms of Councilmember Sims and this being a tough vote, boy, the A-team came out. From my comments last week, which indicated that I was skeptical about the merits of this, a lot of people reached out to me that I have not had conversations with in a long time, and people that I respect, people that I know have been long-term legislators and who have knowledge that I don't even pretend to have based on just my experiences on the city council. But with each of those individuals who reached out to me, and I know their intent was to perhaps talk me into voting yes, they actually helped me solidify the position that I'm taking tonight. And so for that, I am very, very grateful, because for me, it's not about the number of emails you get. It's about the merit of the arguments. Can they tip me off my position? Can they persuade me to look at things from a different view? And I've been inside, outside, all around and through. And each and every one of you who have reached out to either support this lit tax proposal or who were in opposition to it, I am eternally grateful for the wisdom that this community has and that is not shy about bringing forward whenever we're in a tough decision like this. And once again, my commitment going forward is to look for a better plan with better cooperation from our counterparts at the county. And as many people have said, we don't really have a lot of control over the Indiana General Assembly. We all know the history here. But I'm still holding out for hope that if we do a better job of outreach and communication, that perhaps we can even make some inroads there. And some of the people who've reached out to me actually gave me some hope for that. So this is risky, we all know it, but I think we're all on the same page here when it comes to the greater good, doing what we think is best for this community, both in the short term and in the long term, and in the face of unprecedented times. We are going to have to be disciplined, and we are going to have to be kind to one another going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. More second round and final comments. Councilmember Flaherty.
Yeah, just briefly addressing a few things. Well, it was nice to hear all the comments from my colleagues, and I know it's a close question for all of us for various reasons, and I respect that. I too look forward to working with our county colleagues and others as we have been, but frankly, those conversations are sometimes difficult. In the spring, when we started addressing this, there was zero interest in talking. among our county colleagues. They didn't want to have public meetings to address this, and that was pre-COVID. And that's not to, I don't mean to heavily criticize them or pile on there. I just mean it's something we need to work on. It's not easy to convene these bodies to have meaningful conversations about these issues, but we need to. And in fact, 6 of the 7 county councilors I spoke to in recent days all agreed that they know they are well behind on addressing the climate crisis. They know they don't have plans. They know they don't have commitments. They know they need them, and they're in agreement on that. So I'm hopeful that we see some movement there in the coming months and year. And I'm happy to and excited to work with them on those things. And just to be clear on the climate front, every single climate action we take locally should have substantial equity and justice components to it. Everything we do should be aimed at reducing pollution so that it harms people less who live near busy roadways. It should be aimed at insulating people from the impacts of flooding and storms and heat island effect that are going to disproportionately affect older people who are vulnerable to those impacts, people with underlying health conditions who are disproportionately represented in certain vulnerable groups. Lowering energy costs for people. Every single thing we do on the climate front should be an equity and justice measure. That is the intersectionality of it. I think it's important to keep that in mind when we're talking about climate. This isn't nebulous. It's here and now. It's people, and it's most of all for the next generation. And to that generation, just for the historical record, I'm sorry. We're trying. We're going to keep trying. But we know it's a long uphill battle here. So. Thanks. I'm still going to vote yes tonight because I think it's important, but I look forward to the work ahead, even if the local income tax council doesn't pass this. Thanks.
Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, President Volan. I just wanted to kind of follow up on what I started in earlier comment about it being somewhat of an amorphous process. All these different people that weighed in, the Monroe County Apartment Association just weighed in earlier and sent a letter and said they oppose it because their people that live in their apartments are having trouble paying the rents. Ellettsville opposes it, but I think where I really come down to is, so the proposal was kind of flawed. It was not focused. And the process was a part that really bothered me, that our county colleagues, maybe the chamber, and even us, the city council, we really weren't part of the process that led to the ordinance coming forward. And I think that really is probably why it has ended up failing. I realize the public is also a big counter part there, that they should also have enough time to weigh in on it. But so that proposal and the process, they both were flawed. And then in the context that we live in, we live in extraordinary circumstances where we're having a COVID crisis, people are dying, we're having an economic crisis because people can't go out, and we're having a kind of a political crisis too, right? And we're having a racial justice crisis. I mean, people just in general I think we're all tired of those things, and we want to come together, to work together for some common goods. But I think a lot of people out there that are saying no to us. I think they're all kind of worn out on what's going on in the world, and right now it just seems to be just a bad time to try to ask for a tax increase. So thank you very much. I just wanted to follow up on my earlier comments. Thanks.
Thank you. Final second round comments. I would say only that I vaguely regret not limiting members of the public questions and final comments to 3 minutes per round and per person, but I'll try to do better next time. If there are no other comments, I will call for a vote on Resolution 2013. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Yes. Councilmember Ralla,
Yes.
Scambalori,
No.
Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Sims,
No.
Volin,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
No.
Flaherty,
Yes.
Smith,
No.
Sandberg,
No.
Did I miss one?
no, that was everybody.
What was the total vote, please?
Failed.
4-5.
Thank you. I didn't hear as it glitches. The measure fails 4-5. With that, we go to readings for legislation for first reading. We have none. We now go to additional public comment.
Council President Volin.
Yes, sir.
I think I would actually like to make a motion to reconsider Ordinance 2016. I think in light of the vote we just had on the resolution 2013, is now a proper time, or would you prefer this to be?
Mr. Lucas?
I believe the motion's in order. This would be a motion to reconsider the motion to adopt Ordinance 2016. The motion would need to be made by a member on the prevailing side of that motion, which Councilmember Flaherty is, and would essentially put the question of whether to adopt Ordinance 2016 back in front of the council for a revote if this motion were adopted.
Is the motion debatable? Does it require more than a majority?
It's debatable. It requires a majority vote, and it's debatable. The question being reconsidered is also debatable, though Councilmember Flaherty may have a comment on the reasoning behind his motion.
We need a second for the motion to reconsider.
Second.
Mr. Flaherty,
Yes.
would you go ahead?
By way of explanation, I think given the vote of the city council and allocating its potential votes on a possible or on a local income tax ordinance via resolution 2013, that ordinance 2016 is moot, and to the extent that we consider future edit proposals, I think it should be part of that conversation going forward. And I think the simplest way, I mentioned when we were considering ordinance 2016 that if it passed and if resolution 2013 also when did not pass and we did not have a local income tax, that we would need to do something to reintroduce to remove the new provision of code and remove the creation of the commission, because it would no longer be relevant. This is, I think, the easiest and simplest way to dispatch of that. If members are in support of doing so via a motion to reconsider tonight, it could, of course, be done in the future via ordinance that is brought to the council. But I thought this would be simpler, and based on the outcome of resolution 2013, I have made the motion.
Thank you. Are there questions for Councilmember Flaherty about the motion to reconsider? All right. Will the clerk please call the roll on the motion to reconsider?
Can you give me just one moment, please?
Of course.
Thank you. Okay, Councilmember Scambalori.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Rosenbarger?
Point of order. I'm sorry, is that out of order?
Mr.
in the
Flaherty.
roll call vote?
No, it's not. What's the question?
To clarify that, we're voting on the
motion to reconsider. and then we'll conduct the second vote.
Got it. I'm
on
sorry.
whether to
I was making
adopt the
for
ordinance.
myself. Sorry.
This is on the motion to
I got
reconsider.
confused. It's late. Thank you.
Madam Clerk, please continue.
Okay, Councilmember Skimblera voted yes. Councilmember Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Volin,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Rallo.
Yes.
It's unanimous. So we are now reconsidering ordinance 2016, which was adopted tonight. Mr. Lucas, is there discussion on reconsidered motion?
Again, it's debatable. I don't know if Councilmember Flaherty has any more to add, but if there was debate, I think that's in order. But Councilmember Flaherty, I think, has explained the reasoning behind his motion.
Okay. I'll take questions for Councilmember Flaherty on the motion, on the ordinance. We'll go to the public. Is there any public comment on the motion to reconsider, on the reconsideration of ordinance 2016, which was adopted tonight? I have a hand raised. Will the clerk please?
Mr. Keppel, you can be unmuted now.
Thank you.
You'll have five minutes.
I'll be much briefer than that. I simply hope that if you do undo 2016, you'll consider in advance that one of the reasons the tax failed was that there wasn't enough public engagement in imagining what could be done for the good with these funds. And I wonder whether keeping this commission might be a way of engaging the public in a rigorous process of considering what we could do on climate change. And if the commission were kept, might there not then emerge a public consensus in favor of raising the necessary revenue? So I don't think that the process that you conceived very rightly, had the tax been passed, is moot now. I think it may be more relevant than ever. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment on the reopening of ordinance 2016? Last call. Back to council for final comment. Councilmember Sims.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr.
Madam Clerk.
It looks like Alex Goodlad wanted to make a comment as well.
Mr. Goodlad, you'll have 5 minutes.
Sorry, I promise to keep it short this time. So I want to second, David Keppel's sentiments. I don't always agree with what he says, but wholeheartedly agree with what he says this time. And I think it's part of being introspective and learning, where we went short with Ordinance 2013 that, or I might be getting them wrong. That failed because there wasn't enough public input. So this time, because we're going to have to pass this tax at some point, let's keep the commission, and that way we'll look forward to having a tax that does have public input, that goes to where we want and moves the needle. I yield my time.
Thank you. Further public comment? Last call for public comment. And we'll come back to the council for final comment. Councilmember Sandberg.
Just a point of clarification.
Wait. I think Mr. Sims was first.
Okay.
Mr. Sims was first.
Actually, I was seeking a point of clarification as well, either from Councilmember Flaherty or our parliamentarian or Mr. Lucas. My question is, a yes vote is deleting or removing Ordinance 2016, correct?
I don't believe so. This is a vote to adopt Ordinance 2016 that you're now reconsidering. So if the council does not wish to adopt that ordinance, a no vote would be needed.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Sandberg.
That was my question as well, just clarification on what our vote would be. Thanks.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Lucas.
Councilmember Flaherty.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments from Mr. Keppel and Mr. Goodlad. It's an interesting point and sort of one well taken. It's actually one that County Councilor Munson made to me in a conversation the other day when I was mentioning the commission and its point. And she was like, isn't it better to get this commission in place and have them help to work to build the case and make the case clear for what you're trying to do? And I think it's an interesting point. The ordinance really wasn't crafted with that in mind. I think there's too many changes that would have to happen, frankly, in terms of their purview and what would happen, for that to be its purpose. So on balance, I still think that voting not to implement it on reconsideration now is probably the right call. But I think it's a point worth considering that, it's worth thinking about the structures a little bit, about how we approach a topic like this in the future, hopefully near-ish future. Thanks.
Thank you. Final comments. I have one statement to make. I agree with the assessment Councilmember Flaherty made that it could be good to create one in anticipation of the adoption of a tax. But I have to disagree with the members of the public who said maybe we should keep it anyway, because remember that due to the unfortunately compressed schedule, it had to be created very hastily, and it reflects the haste. Without saying, I'm not trying to say that Councilor Flaherty drafted a sloppy presentation. It's just by necessity. We had 3 amendments to it tonight because it had to be created so quickly. But more importantly, we have had an ongoing conversation in the Hamilton administration about boards and commissions. And I think the last thing we need right now is a commission without an actual tax to manage, to advise on. So I simply can't support the retention of this commission. I think we should take time to construct it better before we build it, and not simply adopt this tonight because we've already adopted it. So with that, I would say that my vote will be no to retain what we adopted tonight. Is there any other comment before we go to a vote? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll on the reconsidered ordinance 2016?
Before we read the vote, there was one last question that came in through the chat. Will you allow it or no?
Yes.
Okay. This is from Dave Askins from the B Square Beacon. And given that the vote on Ordinance 2013 was 4-5, which was not a simple majority, does the ordinance still go to the rest of the tax council for consideration? Or does the resolution putting the ordinance in front of the rest of the tax council not need to succeed on a basic majority in order to go forward?
Thank you for that comment. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Okay. Councilmember Rosenberger?
No.
Sims?
No.
Volan?
No.
Piedmont Smith?
No.
Flaherty?
No.
Smith?
No.
Sandberg?
No.
Rollo?
No.
And Scambaluri?
No.
Okay.
Ordinance 2016 is rejected 0-9. We now go to additional public comment. If there is a member of the public who would like to speak on an item that has not on tonight's agenda, please raise your hand in Zoom or type into the chat. Madam Clerk.
There's public comment. This is from David Keppel.
Please go ahead.
Yes, I just want briefly to say I enormously appreciate the work of the council, and I think tonight's discussion illustrates the contributions that those I disagreed with as well as those I agreed with make to the discussion. We face a crisis in American democracy right now, and I think that we in the public have just as much responsibility for this crisis as those of you in government. I think that populism is not the same thing as democracy, and there is a toxic anti-government sentiment in this country, which is in fact what brought us the disastrous national administration that we have. So I particularly appreciated Councilmember Flaherty's talk about representative democracy. And I look forward to us in the public doing a better job in collaborating with you in your work in representing our long-term interests. And I also count on you sometimes to do what we don't want when you feel it's for the common good. Thank you so much for all that you do, each of you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on items that are not a subject of tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we go to council schedule. Mr. Lucas.
Yes, thank you. Next week, currently scheduled, is a committee week for the council, although there are no new items of legislation pending. I would suggest that the council may want to schedule a special session so that it could introduce items for first reading next week, followed by any appropriate committee meetings that same evening. There are a lot of items left to tackle before the end of the year. I know that may seem pretty far away to some folks, but there aren't that many legislative cycles left in the year. So to continue the flow of work, I'd suggest a special session next week, followed by any appropriate committee meetings as the president refers those items.
Is there anyone who would like to make such a motion?
Yes, I'll move that we hold a special session next week, September 23rd.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Councilmember Scambaluri.
Just a request that you clarify our start times before we vote tonight. So,
well, the special session would
determine
be just long enough to introduce legislation, so it would be several minutes. I would suggest that it would start at 6:30.
6:30 start.
And,
that's all I need.
and just to correct Councilmember Volan, there may be resolutions that are ready for action next week that could be adopted in one meeting. So that would be the special session.
I take that back. It may be longer than a few minutes, but nevertheless, there will be there will be some business, however nominal. Any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll on the motion for a special session next week?
Councilmember Sims?
Yes.
Volan?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Rallo?
Yes.
Scambaluri?
Yes.
And Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Okay.
That does it. We will have a special session next week at 6:30, followed by one or more committee hearings to be announced. Anything else, Mr. Lucas?
I don't believe so, no.
Mercifully. My legs have fallen asleep before the rest of me has. So if there's no objection, I'll ask for a call for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are
Aye.
adjourned. Good night, everyone, and thank you for everyone's devotion and dedication. Good night.